The lesion above Franklin Roosevelt's left eye has been of interest to me since 1979, when first described by Dr. Harry Goldsmith. After extensive research, in 2010, I published a book entitled FDR's Deadly Secret with journalist Eric Fettman, in which we outlined our thesis that FDR's death was brought about by a metastatic lesion from a melanoma in his brain. The video which follows will clearly demonstrate how this lesion began and evolved to the time of his death. While traveling with his parents aboard their private railroad car at age 9, a steel curtain rod fell onto Franklin's forehead, cutting him deeply. He sustained a deep gash above and lateral to his left eye, which persisted throughout his life. This 1913 photo of the 32-year-old Franklin Roosevelt as Assistant Secretary of the Navy shows the juvenile scar lateral to the left eye. Most early photographs of Franklin were airbrushed. This rare 1920 photo is unretouched, clearly demonstrating a rather large mole on his right cheek and the juvenile scar over his left eye. As early as 1920, a small freckle begins to form above Franklin Roosevelt's left eye. This is the earliest known photo of it, where it has an apparent triangular shape. This is the 9th issue of Time magazine with Franklin on the cover, showing the small freckle above his left eye. In August 1921, Franklin Roosevelt developed polio. This left him with an inability to use his leg muscles for the remainder of his life. Between 1921 and 1928, Franklin Roosevelt worked very hard to rehabilitate himself. As part of his treatment regimen, Roosevelt was convinced that getting large amounts of sun was therapeutic. There are 2 well-documented letters describing his philosophy, the first of which on July 29, 1924, seen here, stating, quote, "I am confident that with a continuation of plenty of sunlight and exercise, I shall be able to get rid of crutches and braces." In another famous 1924 letter to a Dr. Eggleston of South Carolina, Roosevelt outlines his therapeutic regimen for polio, noting, quote, "Sunlight, all the patient can get, especially direct sunlight on the affected parts. It would be ideal to lie in the sun all day with nothing on. This is difficult to accomplish, but the nearest approach to it is a bathing suit." Since this time, it has been well established that sunlight is a risk factor for the development of melanoma. It is quite clear that Roosevelt's intense exposure to the sun was a factor in causing this lesion to grow and eventually underchange malignant transformation. This rare photo of Roosevelt in September 1926 is one of the few showing him using crutches. The lesion above his left eye has clearly darkened. This is the earliest photo of FDR seen voting from the 1928 gubernatorial election. This exquisitely detailed photo from 1928 gives a very accurate view of the state of the lesion above his left eye. The juvenile scar can be seen laterally, and the triangular scar above the middle of his eyebrow can be seen well, notably not extending into the first horizontal fold above his eye.
Occasionally he took time off to attend public gatherings, such as the State Fair at Syracuse, driving there with his mother, Mrs. Sarah Delano Roosevelt.
In this 1931 photo, something has changed. There is now what appears to be a horizontal line or surgical scar, far lateral to the lesion in the middle of his eyebrow. The juvenile scar is also seen. This photo provides the earliest evidence of an additional surgical procedure.
I have, I believe, avoided the delusion that this is a campaign of persons or of personalities to indulge in such a fantastic idea of my own individual importance.
This is the last photo of Franklin and Eleanor taken in Albany. after Franklin had won the presidency. In 1933, Time magazine honored Franklin Roosevelt with their Man of the Year award. This is the cover photo, demonstrating the lesion over his eye. This is a very commonly circulated photo of Franklin Roosevelt in his car driving to the Capitol to be inaugurated with Herbert Hoover on his right. Magnification of the photograph demonstrates now the initial juvenile scar, the lesion above the middle of his eyebrow, and what appears to be a thin eyebrow and possibly an extension of the surgical scar that we first saw in 1931.
It is possible, of course, in a very few places, that when the banks resume, a very few people who have not recovered from their fear may again begin withdrawals. Under my constitutional power, and in accordance with the terms of the policy that we have set forth, we can entertain representations of the British government. When we have restored the price level, we shall seek to establish and maintain a dollar which will not change its purchasing and debt-paying power during the succeeding generation.
What is most interesting about this widely circulated 1933 photo is the presence of dark horizontal lines within Roosevelt's eyebrow, which appear to be surgical scars.
Vincent Astor welcomes his guest.
Only recently has the importance of Roosevelt's long-term relationship with his friend, neighbor, and distant cousin Vincent Astor come to be appreciated. Roosevelt spent considerable time sailing on Astor's yacht, the Lomazow. This photo shows a group of friends of Astor and Roosevelt, which became known as the Lomazow Gang. Like Roosevelt and Astor, members of the Lomazow Gang were from New York's elite society, with one notable exception. An Alabama doctor named Leslie Hyder was included on a number of the cruises. It soon became evident that Hyder was functioning as Roosevelt's doctor, as documented in a number of letters. On Roosevelt's third cruise aboard the Lomazow over Easter 1934, Hyder performed a minor surgical procedure. Hyder was a head and neck surgeon who had recently completed an internship at the leading cancer hospital in America, the Memorial Hospital for the Treatment of Cancer and Allied Diseases in New York City. In 1930, he published an article in the hospital's journal entitled, "A Case of Carcinoma of the Nasal Mucosa with Extension to the Frontal Sinus." Astor's grandmother had laid the cornerstone of the hospital in 1884, just prior to succumbing to a gynecological malignancy, and Vincent was one of the hospital's major donors. In the files of the FDR Library concerning the Lomazow cruise over Easter 1934, a telegram appears from a Dr. H.B. McEwen. A few years earlier, McEwen had written a paper entitled, quote, "Report of 6 cases of malignant melanoma treated with X-irradiation, with 2 cases cured over 5 years." McEwen requested a short interview just prior to sailing on the Lomazow on board ship relative to treating of, quote, "the cancer patient," unquote, noting that he had been in this type of work for the past 17 years with X-ray and radium.
But in so doing, they are trying to make very complex and theoretical something that is really very simple and very practical.
General Connor, I'm glad to come back again to West Point after an absence of 3 years, and I'm especially happy to see this fine review of the cadets.
I propose to confer within the coming month with small groups of those directly representative of large employers of labor and of large groups of organized labor.
This January 1935 photo is most remarkable for a horizontal line in Roosevelt's left eyebrow, almost surely representing a surgical scar. It can also now be seen that the lesion above his eyebrow is invading the tissue into and above the first horizontal fold above his eye.
This is a great national crusade to destroy enforced idleness, which is an enemy of the human spirit generated by this depression. It seems to me that if the Senate and the House of Representatives in this long and arduous session had done nothing more than pass this Security Bill, Social Security Act, the session would be regarded as historic for all time. I appreciate all that you have done, and I am especially grateful to the press and to the radio and to the newsreels.
This March 1936 photo demonstrates a number of horizontal lines within the eyebrow itself, demonstrating residuals of surgical scars and some darkening of the lesion above his eye.
And so, in behalf of the National Geographic Society, it is my privilege to hand to you the Hubbard Medal for heroic and extraordinary achievements in Arctic and Antarctic exploration.
He tells the people that his plan would protect them from usurpation of power by the Supreme Court.
This is a photograph from a 1937 issue of Life magazine. The caption states, quote, "The day before the barbecue, Mr. Roosevelt emerged from a 4-day retirement at the Little White House, spent nursing a sty on his eye and avoiding photographers. Clearly, Roosevelt had undergone some form of surgical procedure. There was no sty."
I am not speaking tonight of world affairs. Your government is keeping a cool head and a steady hand.
This photo was taken while Roosevelt was cruising in the Gulf of Mexico. What is clearly evident is the deep tanning of Roosevelt's face and hand, showing his propensity to bake himself in the sun, obviously making the lesion considerably worse.
The picnic looks like a good time for all.
Thus, every element in the community can help.
In the late 30s, the lesion darkened considerably and began to grow into the lower portion of Roosevelt's eyebrow.
Of the good neighbor applied at home. It has been estimated, I think fairly accurately, that there are outstanding some 13 billions of dollars worth of electric utility securities.
Is conducted by Bishop Michael of Atlanta. Simplicity is the key. Airs from Washington hum with official business that cannot wait.
America needs a government of constant progress along liberal lines. America requires that this progress be sane and that this progress be honest.
The lesion here almost has a reverse C shape. The eyebrow is thin and horizontal surgical scars are noted. This 1938 photo clearly demonstrates that the lesion has grown into and above the first horizontal fold above Roosevelt's left eye.
Mr. Kevin, I wouldn't make a speech, and I'm not going to make one now.
If we Democrats lay for each other now, we can be sure that in 1940, that will be the corner where the American people will be laying for all of us.
This exquisitely detailed photograph from January 1939 demonstrates the lesion above Roosevelt's left eye, above the first fold of his left eye, and within the eyebrow itself. I've colorized a portion of this to show what the probable actual extent of it was at the time. Note the satellite lesion in his eyelid.
I have said not once but many times that I have seen war and that I hate war. I say that again and again. I hope the United States will keep out of this war.
I'm delighted to see this fine truck, and I hope it'll have a very successful tour of the country. As an old collector of stamps, I think it's going to increase the interest of old people and young people in stamp collecting.
This recently discovered May 1939 photo clearly demonstrates a new surgical lesion in the lateral aspect of Roosevelt's left eyebrow. This photo was taken on a Monday. The weekend before, he was cruising with Ross McIntyre on Narragansett Bay, most likely the site of the surgical procedure. This photo was taken while Roosevelt was entertaining King George on the famous, quote, hot dog, unquote, weekend in June 1939. The lesion here is clearly seen to be dark and growing below Roosevelt's eyebrow. In January of 1940, a physician who had corresponded with FDR in the past, Reuben Peterson, who was a specialist in cancer surgery, sent FDR a letter inquiring about his concern for the spot above his left eye. FDR then asked Ross McIntyre to formulate a response. McIntyre responded as follows, quote, "First, I will say to you in confidence that the pigmented area above the president's eye is very superficial and has never shown any sign of an inflammatory nature. You can rest assured that it is under observation at all times." The Peterson letter is the only record that either Roosevelt or McIntyre were aware of the lesion at all. Reuben Peterson's letter was a cause for great alarm in the Roosevelt camp. The notion that Roosevelt had a lesion which could potentially be cancerous would be devastating to his chances of running for a third term.
I think I am safe in saying that no nation in the history of the world has ever put a larger volunteer army into the field on any given date than the Army of America.
In February 1940, Roosevelt embarked upon one of his 3 cruises aboard the heavy cruiser, the USS Tuscaloosa. Ostensibly, the cruise was to inspect the Panama Canal, but surely the primary purpose was medical. A video made by the U.S. Navy in conjunction with the cruise shows the lesion at its full blossom, in color. Here we see Roosevelt boarding the Tuscaloosa. Behind him is his Chief of Staff, Edwin Powell Watson. Perhaps no video demonstrates the lesion better than this one. These 2 photos were taken on that cruise. The one on the left shows Roosevelt coming down a ramp from the ship, looking towards the left. To Roosevelt's right is Captain Daniel J. Callahan, his naval aide, who was killed in action during the Battle of Savo Island in 1942. Callahan can be seen holding Roosevelt's cane. Behind Roosevelt is his Secret Service agent. The photo on the right shows Roosevelt sitting in his car, now with the lesion totally visible, taken from the left side. This April 9, 1940 photo demonstrates 2 parallel horizontal lines in Roosevelt's eyebrow, most likely representing surgical scars.
And Mr. Roosevelt, the visit means nothing, says an announcement.
When the world is threatened by forces of destruction, it is my resolve and yours to build up our armed defenses.
This is a proof photo taken by Hessler Studios in the Oval Office on August 16, 1940. We used it as the cover of our book because it is the most graphic demonstration of the surgical scar in the bottom of Roosevelt's eyebrow. Hairs from Roosevelt's eyebrow can be seen combed over the lesion. What could also be seen at 11 o'clock at the top of the lesion is a diagonal black line which appears to be retained surgical material. This is a colorized photo from the same date which appeared in national newspapers.
In thus providing for national defense, we have not...
Note the 2 dark spots below Roosevelt's left eye at 6 o'clock and 4 o'clock.
Tonight, there is one more false charge. One outrageously false charge.
Watch this subtle but remarkable October 23, 1940 video, and how Roosevelt avoids wiping his left eye. This photo was taken on October 28, 1940, through a telephoto lens at the opening of the Queens Midtown Tunnel. If you'll remember the piece of surgical material above his eye from an earlier photo, you will now see a circular scar in that area.
Now, therefore, I, Franklin D. Roosevelt, President of the United States of America, under and by virtue of the authority vested in me by the aforesaid Selective Training and Service Act of 1940, do proclaim the following.
This photo comes from a Fortune magazine feature of the two presidential candidates from 1940. It is taken from the right side, but a depression within the lesion itself can be seen quite well. Soon after the election, the lesion began disappearing.
It is no exaggeration to say that all of us in the Americas would be living at the point of a gun loaded with explosive bullets, economic as well as military. We must be the great arsenal of democracy.
By the time of the famous Arsenal of Democracy speech on December 29, 1940, clearly the lesion is diminished in size and color. The 6 o'clock lesion, seen below Roosevelt's eye, has now been removed. This photo is from early 1941. In June of that year, the woman on the right, Missy LeHand, had a disabling stroke.
I must tell you tonight, in plain language, what this undertaking means to you.
In May of 1941, and a period of 6 weeks afterwards, Roosevelt was essentially bedridden from severe anemia. During this time, the lesion basically disappeared, and clearly some surgical procedures were performed at that time.
The time for active defense is now. This is the time for prevention of attack. Those who have long enjoyed such privileges as we enjoy forget in time that men have died to win them.
From the middle of 1941, only a shadow can be seen of the previously dark lesion.
The task of defeating Hitler may be long and arduous. There are a few appeasers and Nazi sympathizers who say that it cannot be done. They even ask me to negotiate with Hitler, to pray for crumbs from his victorious table. This course I have rejected, and I reject it again.
From Berlin and Tokyo and Rome, we have been described as a nation of weaklings, playboys.
This March 1942 photo appears to show a skin graft where the lesion used to be, as well as a horizontal scar within his eyebrow.
Grant us a common faith that man shall know bread and peace, that he shall know justice and righteousness, freedom and security, an equal opportunity and an equal chance to do his best, not only in our own lands, but throughout the world.
Industries. Of the teenage draft, the president says,
and as usual, he carves the turkey. The president has always been interested in the welfare of the hospital.
This is the last known photo of Roosevelt voting. The difference between this and 1928 is both striking and sad. It is not unknown for melanomas to spontaneously regress, but the only explanation for the striking difference in the lesion between May of 1940 and June of 1942 is surgical removal. It is equally remarkable that the Associated Press did not note or choose to point out that the lesion had disappeared at the time of the 10th anniversary of Roosevelt's presidency. In 2008, I approached the world-famous dermatopathologist Bernard Ackerman to write a paper with me with respect to the lesion above Roosevelt's left eyebrow. And our article appeared in the Archives of Dermatology, one of the world's most important dermatological journals. The conclusions were as follows. The failure of observers of Roosevelt, especially his physicians, to comment on his riveting facial lesion and to identify it as a probable melanoma speaks volumes. This is the abstract of that article, which summarizes this video. In 1923, Franklin Delano Roosevelt developed a pigmented lesion above his left eyebrow. Over the course of the next 20 years, it continued to grow, slowly, but irrepressibly. When fully formed, it resembled most closely a melanoma associated with signs of regression. Amazingly, during those 2 decades, none of Roosevelt's physicians seemed to have paid any heed to the lesion, and there is no evidence that a biopsy was ever performed of it. Neither are there any references in the press to the startlingly distracting pigmented lesion on the face of the most photographed person in the world. The authors probe the various aspects of this remarkable phenomenon and bring a novel perspective to it. Indeed, biopsies had been performed, as had multiple surgical procedures. The evidence that the lesion above Roosevelt's left eye was melanoma is overwhelming. The only other diagnostic possibility cited by Dr. Ackerman in our paper was an age spot. By 1945, the melanoma had metastasized to Roosevelt's brain. A bleed into a metastatic lesion in the right side of Roosevelt's brain was the terminal event in his life on April 12, 1945.